Now,
we got word here just at about 8:45 that there was a body found on Horn Island, and the officials are now working on bringing that back.
Breaking news, a body has been found on Horn Island near where missing 18-year-old Nolan Wells went missing. Search crews like this one you see here in the air have been searching for him for more than 40 hours now.
We got word.
We are back on this case, and I need you to understand something before we get into what has developed since our last video, when we covered the disappearance and death of Nolan Xavier Wells on Horn Island on July 4th, 2026. We told you that the silence of the people who returned from that island without him was the loudest thing about this entire story. That silence just got a lot more complicated, because since our last video, 3 things have happened that have fundamentally shifted the direction of this case. The family has retained one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys in the United States. Deletions have been discovered on Nolan's phone, a phone that, according to his own mother, he never would have left behind voluntarily. And the story being told by the young men who were on that boat with Nolan has now been directly contradicted by the one person they used as their alibi. If you have not watched our first video on this case, I'm going to put the link in the description and pin it in the comments. Go watch that first so you have the full foundation. Because today we are not starting over. We are picking up exactly where the story broke open. And I promise you, it is broken wide open. Drop a comment right now and tell me, do you believe Katie McCormick's account, or do you believe Wyatt, Warren, and Eric's account of what happened on that boat? Because by the end of this video, you are going to have a very clear opinion. And if your read on this situation ends up matching what investigators or Benjamin Crump's team officially confirms, I will give you a personal shout-out in our next video. Your name, on camera, in front of this entire community. So drop it below right now and let's get into it. And if you found us through this update and you are not yet subscribed, hit that button. Turn on notifications. Because this case is moving and we are not going to let it go quiet. Let's start with the timeline. Because the timeline is where this entire story either holds together or falls completely apart. And right now, it is falling apart. When we last left this case, the account from the group of young men Nolan traveled with, Wyatt, Warren, and Eric, was straightforward on its surface. They said they left Horn Island without Nolan because Nolan chose to stay behind. Their reason? He had met a young woman on the island named Katie McCormick, and he wanted to keep talking to her. That was the explanation. That was the story. Nolan stayed. They left. Simple. Except Katie McCormick says that is not what happened. According to Katie's own account, she and Nolan did speak on the island. She confirms that. But she says the conversation ended because Nolan told her he had to leave. He told her he was headed back to the boat with his friends because it was time to go. Katie is not saying Nolan disappeared into the crowd. She is not saying she lost track of him. She is saying Nolan ended their conversation specifically to go back to that boat. So now we have 2 completely incompatible stories. Wyatt, Warren, and Eric say Nolan chose to stay on the island with Katie. Katie says Nolan told her he was going back to the boat with his friends. Both of those things cannot be true simultaneously. One of those accounts is wrong. And the question of which one is wrong is the question that sits at the absolute center of this entire investigation. Now here is where it gets even more specific. And I want you to follow this carefully because the details matter enormously. Ashley Cole, who is Warren's mother, made a public statement saying that Warren was interviewed by the Jackson County Sheriff's Department and cooperated fully. And in that statement, she said Warren last saw Nolan at around 3 p.m. on July 4th, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now think about what that means within the timeline they have given us. If the last time Warren saw Nolan was at 3 p.m., and the reason he last saw him was because that was the moment they asked him whether he was coming with them or staying, then logically that conversation happened because they were about to leave at 3 p.m., but the boat did not leave at 3 p.m. According to the information that has come out, the boat departed the island at approximately 4:30 p.m. That is an hour and 30 minutes after Warren allegedly last saw Nolan. So let me lay this out plainly. Warren's own mother's statement says Warren last saw Nolan at 3 p.m. The boat left at 4:30 p.m., which means, if we take that statement at face value, Warren and his group stayed on that island for another hour and 30 minutes after the last time any of them saw Nolan. And in that hour and 30 minutes, not one of them went to find him. Not one of them checked on him. Not one of them made sure the person they brought out to a remote barrier island with no cell service and no way home was aware they were about to leave. That does not line up. And it should not line up for a trained investigator either. But here is what makes Katie's account so much more credible by comparison. If Nolan told Katie at some point in the afternoon that he had to go back to the boat because his friends were leaving, that conversation would have had to happen close to departure time, not at 3 p.m. close to 4:30 p.m., which means Nolan was not sitting on that island contentedly watching time pass. He was actively trying to get back to his ride. He was told or understood that it was time to go, and he moved in the direction of that boat. According to Katie, he made it back to the boat, or at the very minimum, he left her with the explicit intention of getting on that boat. So the question is no longer whether Nolan chose to stay on the island. The real question that the Jackson County Sheriff's Department should be treating as the central focus of this investigation is what happened on or near that boat between the moment Nolan left Katie and the moment that vessel departed the island without him. Now, let's talk about the boat itself, because there is a detail in the timeline that has not gotten nearly enough attention, and it needs to. The group's explanation for the urgency of their departure includes the fact that the boat was taking on water. That was part of the reason they allegedly had to leave. The vessel was malfunctioning, and they needed to get back to the mainland. Hold on. Let us think about that for a moment. If the boat was taking on water, if there was a mechanical emergency serious enough to require an immediate return to the mainland, and these were teenagers on open water in the Gulf of Mexico, 10 to 15 miles from shore, 30 to 40 minutes from the nearest dock, why would you leave someone behind? If anything, a malfunctioning vessel creates more urgency to account for every single person in your group before you attempt that crossing. You do not leave anyone on a barrier island when your emergency exit is already compromised. And here's the other side of that same contradiction. If the boat was taking on water and that was the reason for the urgent departure, why did they stay on the island for an hour and 30 minutes after allegedly last seeing Nolan? If the boat emergency was real and pressing, you do not wait an hour and a half. You address it immediately. You get everyone on board. You go. The timeline they've offered does not survive basic scrutiny. And the police, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, has thus far publicly stated there is no evidence of foul play. They have made that determination while these contradictions are sitting in plain sight. Which brings us to Benjamin Crump. The family of Nolan Xavier Wells has retained attorney Benjamin Crump. If that name is familiar to you, and it should be, it is because Benjamin Crump has represented the families of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, among others. He is not an attorney you call when you are confident that local law enforcement is handling your case properly. He is the attorney you call when you have looked at what local law enforcement is doing and concluded that you cannot trust the process. Christine and Elmore Wansley looked at this investigation. They looked at the account from the boys on the boat. They looked at the contradiction with Katie. They looked at what their son's phone contained when they got it back. And they made a decision to bring in Benjamin Crump. That decision tells you something. It tells you that this family, the people who knew Nolan better than anyone alive, the people who raised him, who know his habits, who know what he would and would not do, have seen enough to believe that the official narrative of an accidental drowning is not the complete truth, and they are not willing to accept it without a fight. Crump has confirmed that the family is pursuing a private investigation running parallel to the official one. They are not waiting for the Jackson County Sheriff's Department to reach conclusions. They are building their own record of what happened on Horn Island on July 4th, 2026. And the first major action Crump's team has taken is the one that may matter most of all. Nolan's body is being flown to Washington, D.C. for an independent autopsy. Let that land for a moment. The family of an 18-year-old boy who died in Mississippi is having his body transported to Washington, D.C. because they do not trust the medical examiner in their own state to conduct an objective examination. That is not a small thing. That is not a routine precaution. That is a family saying, with the full weight of legal representation behind them, that they believe the institutional infrastructure in Jackson County, Mississippi, is too compromised to be trusted with the most critical piece of forensic evidence in this case. The independent autopsy is designed to examine every aspect of Nolan's physical condition, not just whether water was present in his lungs. Every physical injury, every mark, every detail that the body carries about its final hours. If Nolan was thrown overboard, if he entered that water not voluntarily but by force, the body may carry evidence of that. Defensive injuries, trauma inconsistent with a simple drowning, evidence of a struggle. We do not have those results yet. We are waiting, and we will cover them the moment they become available. But here is what I want you to think about in the meantime. The fact that an independent autopsy is necessary. The fact that a grieving family felt compelled to remove their son's body from a jurisdiction where he died and fly it to another city for examination by people they can trust is itself a statement about the state of this investigation. It is a statement about what this family believes is happening in Ocean Springs, Mississippi right now. Now I need to talk to you about the phone, because the phone is where this case takes a turn that I genuinely struggled to process when I first went through the details. When Christine retrieved Nolan's phone from the group that returned it to the family, she made a discovery. There were deletions on the phone, messages or content that had been removed. A dead man's phone had been accessed after his death, and things had been taken out of it. Now, before we go any further, I want to be precise about what we know and what remains alleged. What we know is that Nolan's family and Benjamin Crump's team have confirmed that deletions were found on the device. What is alleged, and I want to be clear this has not been confirmed by any forensic examination, is who made those deletions and when. But here's the question that I cannot get past. And I want you to sit with this because it matters enormously. Nolan's phone had Face ID, biometric security. In 2026, that means a phone will not unlock for just anyone. It requires a recognized face. It requires Nolan's face. The phone that was in the possession of the group who returned to the mainland, the phone they say Nolan left behind on the boat, had security measures that should have made it inaccessible to anyone who was not Nolan. So the question becomes, how did anyone get into that phone? There are limited possibilities. The family, as next of kin, could potentially contact Apple through official channels and gain access through a legal process. That takes time. That leaves a record. That is a documented procedure. Or, and this is a possibility that Crump's team and Nolan's family are reportedly examining, the phone was accessed using Nolan's face before that face was no longer available, before the body entered the water. I am not going to state that as fact. I am going to state it as the logical implication of the security architecture of that device and the circumstances surrounding when and how those deletions occurred. If you have a phone with Face ID and someone accessed it without going through Apple's official legal process, the math on how that happened points in a very specific direction. Law enforcement has now requested that the family surrender the phone. The family, advised by Benjamin Crump, has declined to hand it over to the same agency that has publicly stated there is no evidence of foul play, while a phone containing deletions of unknown content sits in the family's possession. The family wants that phone analyzed by an independent digital forensics team, not the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, not a Mississippi state agency. An independent team whose findings cannot be shaped by proximity to the people being investigated. That is the right call. And I think most of you watching this already know that. I want to pause here because I know you've been sitting with this and processing it. And I want to hear from you right now. In the comments, tell me your read on the phone. Do you think the deletions were made before or after Nolan entered the water? Do you think the Face ID issue is as significant as it appears? And most importantly, do you believe this investigation as it currently stands is capable of delivering justice for Nolan's family? Drop it all in the comments. This community has been following this case closely, and your analysis matters. And remember, whoever drops a theory that ends up closest to what Benjamin Crump's team or investigators officially confirm, I will shout you out by name in the next video. That promise stands. There is one more element of this update that I want to address directly, and it is the allegation, reported and circulating, that one of the mothers of the young men on that boat holds a judicial position in Jackson County. I am going to be careful here because this has not been officially confirmed in the public record as of this video. What I will say is this. If it is true that a parent of anyone connected to this case holds institutional power within the same county system that is conducting the investigation, that is a conflict of interest that demands immediate independent oversight. It demands that the Mississippi Attorney General's office or federal agency step in and examine whether the investigation has been conducted without bias. Small towns in America have a documented history of protecting their own. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is a pattern with a paper trail going back decades. The question of whether that pattern is operating in Ocean Springs right now is exactly the kind of question that Benjamin Crump's involvement is designed to force into the open. If this investigation concludes without a satisfactory accounting of the timeline contradictions, the deleted phone content, the Face ID access question, and the boat malfunction story, that conclusion will not hold, not with Crump involved, not with an independent autopsy on the way, not with the eyes of the country on Jackson County, Mississippi. Here is where we stand right now. The independent autopsy results are pending. The phone is in the family's possession and has not been surrendered to local law enforcement. Benjamin Crump is actively building a parallel investigation with the family. The accounts of Wyatt, Warren, and Eric remain in direct contradiction with the account of Katie McCormick. And the Jackson County Sheriff's Department has publicly maintained that there is no evidence of foul play, a position that becomes harder to defend with every detail that continues to surface. 3 things to take from this update. The first, when local law enforcement declares there is no evidence of foul play in the early stages of an investigation involving multiple unresolved timeline contradictions, that declaration is not a conclusion. It is a starting position. And starting positions can be wrong. The family of Nolan Wells was right not to accept it as the final word. The second, digital forensics is now one of the most powerful investigative tools available in cases like this. A phone does not lie the way people do. The metadata on a device, when files were accessed, when deletions occurred, what was in those deleted files, is recoverable even after deletion in most cases with the right forensic tools. The fight to get that phone into the hands of a truly independent examiner is one of the most important battles being fought in this case right now. The third, Benjamin Crump's involvement changes the pressure dynamics of this investigation fundamentally. Every case he has taken has forced a level of public and institutional accountability that would not have existed without him. His presence in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, is a signal to everyone connected to this case, in the sheriff's department, in the coroner's office, in the medical examiner's office, that the standard of scrutiny has just been raised significantly. That matters. And families in similar situations, families who feel that local law enforcement is not taking their law seriously, should know that civil rights legal representation is available and it is a legitimate and powerful tool. We're going to stay on this case. Every development, every official statement, every finding from that independent autopsy, every update from Benjamin Crump's team, we will be here covering it. Share this video, not for the views. For Nolan, every share is one more person who knows his name, knows the contradictions in this timeline, and knows that his family is fighting for truth in a system that has not made that fight easy. You sharing this right now is a direct action in service of a family that has still not received a single satisfactory answer about how their son ended up dead on the west end of Horn Island, while the people who brought him there went home safe. Subscribe if you're not already here. Turn on notifications because this story is not done. And to Christine Elmore and Christopher Wells Sr., we see you. We are not moving on. And the truth about what happened to Nolan on Horn Island on July 4th, 2026 is coming. One contradicted timeline, one deleted message, and one independent autopsy at a time. Rest easy, Nolan. Your family is fighting for you. And so are we. See you in the next one.